a lot of golfers will typically focus on contact with ball and face. But what I like to do first is get players to focus on contact with the ground and the club.
Okay.
If you fix the contact with the ground and the club first, usually the contacts with the club and the face will improve as a result.
Welcome back to the channel, guys. Kerrod Gray here today at Sentosa Golf Club in Singapore with their national coach, Matt Ballard. Matty, thanks for coming along, mate.
Thanks for having me on your channel.
Mate, we are here sweating it out, helping you guys at home with your short game. We're going to do some bunker play. We're going to do some pitch shots. We're going to analyze some errors that we see with the common golfer and help you guys at home shoot some lower scores. Let's get stuck in. Okay, Matty, so what we're doing here, mate, is we're looking at a very typical, let's call it pitching error that we see with players of all levels, let's say varying degrees. Now, yourself working with the Singapore national team, we see that you are working with high-level players all the time. This gentleman in front of us, he shot us through this video. He was struggling to control his trajectory and rollout of the golf ball. And he sent us through these two videos. We've got a down the line and face on here. And what we're going to do is we're going to analyze really his movement pattern based around what he was actually struggling with, because it's all about the outcome, right? He's struggling with his trajectory control and roller. Also mentioned he was struggling with his contact, right? Very common that they all kind of fit together.
Yep.
So what we're looking for here in the setup position, and what I want you to do is I scroll through these, I want you to make some observations on the screen. Let's go to the down the line on the left-hand side to start off with.
Sure. Well, you know, first of all, it looks like the club face there is taking away a little bit closed at the moment. That's also one thing that I see straight away. You mentioned he's trying to hit a little high shot. That might be a little trouble there. His right arm looks like it's getting a little bit behind him, getting behind the body a bit. Posture, I think we could fix that a little bit, and then maybe look at his pivot as well. Get him to pivot a little better. And definitely looks like, as you follow through there on the downswing, that he could be dragging the hand a little bit into impact, which will affect his contacts, affect his strike, and obviously the ability to hit that high soft shot, which he's looking to try and do. Yeah,
big time. And we can see really how aggressive that transition looks, even if it's in slow motion, right? So he's swinging the golf club back here, and we'd say the face is closed meaning that in this stage of the swing, it's kind of a little bit more than what we would see with the spine angle when pitching. We generally actually like to see it closer to toe up.
It's pointing a bit more to the ground, yeah, exactly.
Correct. So then as he then changes direction, really gets himself into this position where it looks like he's dragging that handle in, and from face on over here on the right-hand side, we can really see that as this comes in, this handle, for trying to hit a high soft shot, that is really, really, really coming in very, very, very steep, isn't it?
Yeah, and he looks like he's, you know, hanging back a little bit too. That's a, you know, in an effort to try and get some loft onto the club face too, right? So we can work on the pivot, but I think we've got to work on the club face first.
Yeah, great. Okay, fantastic. So what we'll do here, Matty, is I want you to kind of recreate what you see there. So set up to that ball for me. I want you to recreate what we just viewed with that image. And we see that the face here is shut down to the ground.
Yep.
Now, talk about his pivot with what he was doing. And would you say that is affected because of the way he was setting up with his legs?
Yeah, definitely. I think he's sitting more like he's sitting on a chair. I think it makes it very difficult for him to sort of do any kind of pivoting at all. Quite stationary there. You know, the first thing we could look at is definitely how he starts the backswing. I'd like to get him to try and, especially with his upper body, you know, try and feel like this right elbow sort of stays in like a bicep curl position, and in front of his body, rather than getting it sucked in behind him as well. If he has too much pivot though on the backswing, that can also be disastrous too, right? So that's something I'm always wary of. There's a certain level once you get to about 20 or 30 meters where you have to recruit a little bit of pivot to try and, you know, get some more energy and more power. But for this particular shot, I don't know how far he's hitting it. So we can say, looking at it, probably about a 20-30 meter shot. We can have a little bit of a pivot here, which will help the arms and club sort of, as you can see, fall into line here a little bit more and not go so much out this way. That will definitely help. So adding a little bit of pivot with the pelvis would be helpful. And getting him to shift a little bit into the right heel would be something I'd look at. So getting him to move a little bit more pressure into that right heel, that'll allow the club to set in a better position. From there, he'll have a better chance of delivering it more from the inside, a little shallower, and then be able to loft that ball a bit high in the air.
If I set up to the ball here, we're going to recreate what we saw with his impact position. So this golfer specifically struggled with trajectory and rollout. Now, we saw on camera that really through the ball, he kind of almost had this look, right?
Yeah, so absolutely.
Pelvis was back.
Maybe he wasn't as open either too. He's probably a little bit square, he's a little bit back. His spine angle's a little bit back as well. Now this handle forward here, it creates a lot of leading edge interaction into the turf. And he mentioned that he's struggling with his contacts. So to me, that's a red flag. I think that's something that we would address first of all. I like to get players to focus on contacts. A lot of golfers will typically focus on contact with ball and face. But what I like to do first is get players to focus on contact with the ground and the club.
Okay.
If you fix the contact with the ground and the club first, usually the contacts with the club and the face will improve as a result.
That's very interesting, right? Because with all these videos that we're doing, a lot of players just look to change the aesthetic of the swing. So they might see that a professional golfer, so for example, for pitching, right, they might be in a position like this. The toe is more up, they might have a little bit of pivot here with their body. And we can see that this golfer is very much in this position. Now, at the end of the day, if you just get them into that position, that's not really addressing the skill and their proficiency of strike over and over again. So what you're saying here is that this player who's digging the loft down into the ground, before we even begin to talk about that, you're actually going to get them and educate them on how to use the sole of the golf club in. Okay, so talk me through a little activity that you would do with this player to build that concept and the awareness of how that golf club needs to
well, first thing is about education, exactly. So I would show them the bottom of the club, so I'd talk to them about what is the sole, what is the leading edge, what is the trailing edge, and then ask them when they hit that shot, which part of the club actually hit the ground first. Okay, so then in this case, we know that the gentleman would be hitting it in the using the leading edge, and then explain to them what would happen. So I would demonstrate and I'd show them some shots where you'd actually just drive the club into the ground and how it gets stuck into the ground like that. Then I would ask them to hit the sole into the ground, and then see what that feels like. Does it bounce? Does it dig? Based on the turf conditions too, you might get some varying degrees of results there.
So when I do that, and I do something very similar in my coaching practice, a lot of players straight away go, well, aren't I going to thin it? Because their concept is that they need to hit down on the ball. They need to put this ball back. They need to squeeze that ball in. But we're not trying to actually compress the ball here like you would with a full shot. We're not looking for ball speed. We're looking for predictability of the contact,
Love that word.
the launch, and the rollout. Right. So we're actually looking for, and I believe it's a 1-to-1 ratio in regards to ball speed and club head speed, and that gives you the ability to get some feel. Right. So with that, we're actually looking not to compress and squeeze the ball out like we would a full shot. We're looking to get this ball sort of coming softer off the face, and that's what it's going to feel like.
Yeah, sure.
So what you were just talking about then was using the sole of the golf club, and a lot of players have no idea what that actually feels like. So for those at home, just simply hitting some small little pitch shots, feeling like, would you say, is it the back end?
Yeah, we do all three. So definitely I would get them, the ones that are leading the handle in like that and digging the club in, I would straight away get them to understand that this part of the club is the part of the club they should be trying to hit the ground with. So that's a bit of an eye-opener for a lot of club golfers. They've never even thought about that concept at all. But that's, if you go and look at all the clubs that are designed, there's a lot of different variations of the grind which can actually help you hit the shot nice and high in the sky. So I would get them to hit some shots and just say to them simply, without much instruction, can you hit this part of the club into the ground? Now when I'm doing clinics and I pick up players' wedges, you'll see a lot of wear mark at the front.
Big time.
And I can almost go up to them and say, oh, so you don't like hitting it high?
Yeah,
and they look at me and say, how do you know?
How do you know, yeah.
And I can tell because of the wear and tears on the front of that leading edge, and there's none on the back of the club. So that would be the very first thing. And, you coaching too, Kerrod, I know that players love the good sound, the good feeling of good contact.
Yeah.
So I like to reverse engineer it. I get the players to feel like they're making good contact first. Their confidence grows, their spin, their flight, their trajectory, everything grows and improves as a result of that, and they get a kick out of it. And usually when they get that feeling of nice contact, they then start to work backwards from there. So getting them to hit the back of the club will be the first place I go.
And that's amazing, right? Because what we'll see just from that simple process and outcome of me trying to, instead of getting the handle leaning forward and the leading edge digging, trying to get the sole of the golf club, feeling like the back edge is coming in, we'll notice at the moment of impact that when I do this, and we'll put a freeze frame of me at impact doing this later up on the screen here, you'll notice that the shaft will be more vertical, right? We can see that we've actually got a little bit of a cupping in this lead wrist, which then allows the face to stay more open through the ball.
Yeah.
So before we talk further, what we'll do is we'll give a demonstration of the technique that the player was using before, and we'll just get this bit of handle drag action. Now, look, struck that okay, wasn't really too diggy, but even from there, for me to try and control the ball to that pin, it was almost impossible.
Well, you mentioned ball speed, right? That came off really fast.
Yeah, big time. And for something like a 54-degree wedge, The reason I feel like players have so much loft in their bag with the 60 and 64 is because they actually don't know how to use the golf club correctly. With that 54-degree wedge, I just drove that down to like a 9-iron.
Absolutely.
Right, I was trying to turn this finesse club into a distance club. So now what I'll do instead is I'll have a couple of little rehearsals feeling like the sole of the golf club is coming in. Now, a lot of players are going to assume that they're going to knife this over the back of the green, which then also brings in the discussion of low point control.
Yes.
Right, where the bottom of the club needs to hit.
Sure.
Now, I have my own preferences on getting a player to have a rehearsal swing right next to it to just simply get an understanding of where the club is striking relation to the ball, almost pretending there's a ghost ball. Is there anything else that you get to think about?
Yeah, the low point control is huge, and most people, as you say, well, they try to feel like they're scooping it or flicking it early or releasing it early.
Yeah.
In a sense, that's kind of what we want them to do, right?
Yeah.
Releasing that shaft and that club head a little bit better. Just to reverse back a little bit, I get the players to just do it without any instruction. So how would you get the back of the club to hit the ground? But then get them and just tell them to observe where they're hitting the ground. Now, once they can get it to in the same spot, usually I won't talk about low point. They might be pretty good at that. But if they're hitting too far behind it, you can imagine that, you know, the club is exiting too early ahead of the ball, which would give the knife, right?
Yeah.
I get players to thump the ground.
Yeah.
So huge about hitting the ground, hitting the ground, hitting the ground. They're not allowed to hit a shot unless they hit the ground. So that will be first and foremost. Then this discussion goes, oh, well, I might hit it fat. I might hit it heavy. Okay, well, let's hit it heavy.
Yeah.
So I actually get them to hit it heavy, but hard into the ground behind the ball, assuming they have the correct release. And then all of a sudden, it feels like a drop kick.
So true.
Drop kick. And this one's the eye-opener. Once we get them hitting the drop kick, they go, oh, that felt like a duff. But then you watch what happens with the ball. It pops up high, soft, and drops down, gets the flight, right? So then I'm like, is that a bad shot? It felt yuck. It maybe didn't look great, but the result was what we were looking for. Then we shift the low point a little bit more forward. There's a couple of things we can do with setup, pressure shift, just to make sure that they get that low point a little bit more forward. And once we do that, then typically they get the ball nice and high and soft and clean contacts. Yeah,
so isn't it amazing when you first look at a player and their video, it's so easy to pick apart every single part of their technique. But at the end of the day, what we've just established here is a simple process that nearly any player can work through who feels like they drive their leading edge down into the ground, the handle gets forward, and they feel like they don't have any control over the flight and the rollout of the golf ball. So simply for every player at home who feels like they struggle with this, essentially what you need to do is you need to get into a position where the handle is going to be feeling like at the moment of impact, the club head's tossing underneath a little bit more, and we're not digging, we're simply just getting that club gliding through the ground, right? So what we're going to do here, just with those players at home that are trying to get a better idea of something that they can do, no matter their knowledge or understanding of positional things throughout the swing, which is not really necessary anyway, is talking about contact, okay? So we're going to look at where the club is striking the ground. I can see that is relatively in line with the ball, but I'm also feeling like the back end or the sole of the golf club is hitting the ground.
Yeah, that'd be two great key things to think about.
So let's have a look at the flight of this ball when it pops out of here, and I'm just going to get a sensation of recreating exactly what I was just rehearsing there. And we can see that launched a lot higher, landed a lot softer, and actually had a bit of spin and kind of stopped closer. So huge difference in the delivery of the golf club there. We can see it was just a nice little bruising rather than a digging and chopping.
Yeah, definitely glided.
For a player that is feeling like they're struggling at the moment of impact, they're getting the handle dragging forward, and they're really getting these sort of stabby shots that they can't control the flight, I think this is a great activity that they can do. Get an understanding and concept of how to use the sole of the golf club, see where the bottom of the club is striking the ground, and then simply recreate that feel into the ball.
How did that feel at impact for you?
Soft.
Soft.
It felt soft, it felt dead. It didn't feel like I was trying to nut a 6-iron out there. It
didn't go fast.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that's a common thing.
Cheers.
Good job.
Awesome.